Rain hammered the windows of Titan Automotive in downtown San Francisco. The storm blurred neon signs across polished marble floors and chrome displays. Inside the luxury garage, silence carried more tension than the thunder outside. 13-year-old Raymond Nelson stood near the entrance, holding a mop bucket beside his mother. His sneakers were soaked from the cold February rain. Beatrice Nelson cleaned offices at night and luxury garages during weekends. She worked 3 jobs after losing her husband years earlier in Oakland. At the center of the service bay sat a crimson 1962 Ferrari 250 GTO. The car looked less like transportation and more like sacred history. Theodore Harrington watched mechanics circle the vehicle with exhausted frustration. The 68-year-old billionaire wore a charcoal overcoat and carried grief behind his tired eyes. Preston Whitmore III had marched across the floor with polished shoes and inherited confidence. His family name opened doors across California's elite automotive circles. He glanced toward Raymond with open irritation before stopping beside the Ferrari. "Beatrice, this is a professional facility," Preston snapped sharply, "not a daycare center from East Oakland." Several mechanics laughed quietly while pretending to inspect engine diagrams. Raymond lowered his eyes but said nothing. His mother squeezed his shoulder gently, silently begging him to stay invisible. Years of surviving poverty had taught her dangerous lessons about powerful men. Preston tossed a push broom toward Raymond without another glance. "Sweep the floor and stay away from the car," he ordered coldly. "That machine costs more than your entire neighborhood." Raymond picked up the broom slowly, yet his attention never left the Ferrari's exposed engine. The deep metallic rhythm carried something hidden beneath its smooth growl. A tiny hesitation echoed between combustion cycles. Most people heard perfection. Raymond heard pain. Across the room, Theodore Harrington rubbed his wedding ring while staring silently at the Ferrari. The vehicle connected him to his dead father and his late son. Losing the car felt like losing them again. Then Raymond heard the engine stumble once more. His grip tightened around the broom handle. The storm intensified outside, while tension thickened inside Titan Automotive. Rainwater rolled down enormous glass windows, overlooking the San Francisco streets below. Luxury sedans lined the polished floor like museum exhibits beneath harsh white lights. Raymond swept slowly beside the Ferrari while pretending not to listen. Preston Whitmore continued speaking confidently to Theodore Harrington near the service platform. Every sentence sounded rehearsed, polished, and completely empty. "We replaced the ignition assembly last quarter," Preston explained smoothly. "Our technicians also recalibrated the fuel injection parameters twice." Theodore stared at the Ferrari without blinking. "You charged me $92,000 for that repair." Preston forced a diplomatic smile. "Vintage European systems require specialized labor and imported materials." The older billionaire looked exhausted rather than angry. "And the engine still dies climbing Pacific heights." Silence followed his words. Several mechanics suddenly found reasons to avoid eye contact. Raymond noticed the discomfort immediately. Experienced workers always recognized failure before executives admitted it aloud. The Ferrari engine started again for another diagnostic cycle. Its legendary V12 echoed beautifully through the enormous garage. Yet Raymond heard something buried underneath the harmony. A microscopic flutter interrupted the rhythm during sustained idle. His broom stopped moving. The sound triggered an old memory from Giuseppe Martinelli's garage in Oakland. Raymond remembered an aging Alfa Romeo Spider with a hidden fuel delivery issue. Experienced mechanics blamed sensors, carburetors, and ignition timing. Giuseppe discovered deteriorating rubber inside a heat-damaged fuel line. "Machines whisper before they scream," Giuseppe once told him patiently. "Smart mechanics listen early." Raymond's eyes followed the Ferrari's fuel system automatically. One section curved dangerously close to the exhaust manifold. The line appeared flawless externally, but appearances meant nothing after decades of extreme heat cycles. Suddenly, Theodore Harrington spoke again, quieter this time. "I'm finished," he admitted heavily. "I'm donating the car to the Peterson Museum in Los Angeles." Preston nodded with obvious relief, hidden beneath professional sympathy. "That may be the healthiest decision emotionally." The billionaire's expression darkened instantly. "You think this is about money?" Nobody answered. Theodore stepped closer to the Ferrari and rested his hand against the hood carefully. My father taught me driving in this car. Later, I taught my son. His voice cracked unexpectedly, and now both of them are gone. Raymond looked down at the broom in his hands. His mother's warnings echoed inside his mind. Stay quiet, stay invisible, stay safe. But the Ferrari engine stumbled again. And Raymond already knew exactly why. Raymond's heart pounded while the Ferrari engine echoed through the service bay. The sound crawled beneath his skin with mechanical precision and quiet desperation. He knew remaining silent would protect his mother from dangerous consequences, but silence also meant abandoning the truth. Theodore Harrington turned slowly toward the exit with defeated shoulders. His expensive coat looked heavy against his aging frame. Years of wealth could not protect anyone from grief. Raymond suddenly dropped the broom beside the tool cabinet. "Mr. Harrington," he called clearly. Every conversation inside the garage stopped immediately. The billionaire paused near the glass doors while rain hammered outside violently. Preston Whitmore turned around with immediate annoyance written across his face. Raymond swallowed once before speaking again. "I know what's wrong with your Ferrari, sir." Complete silence swallowed the entire service bay. Then laughter exploded across the room. Several mechanics leaned against workbenches while shaking their heads mockingly. Derek Sullivan, Titan Automotive's lead technician, laughed loudest among them. He carried 20 years of experience and endless arrogance. "The janitor kid solved it," Derek joked loudly. "Maybe Ferrari should replace engineers with middle school students." More laughter followed. Beatrice rushed toward her son immediately, with panic flooding her face. "Raymond, stop talking right now," she whispered desperately. "Please, baby, not here." Preston Whitmore approached slowly with dangerous calm, replacing his earlier irritation. "Your son has crossed a line," he said coldly toward Beatrice. "This facility handles multi-million-dollar vehicles, not childish fantasies." Raymond looked directly at Theodore Harrington instead. "The problem isn't electronic," he explained carefully. "The computers keep missing it because the pressure drop happens too briefly." Derek crossed his arms mockingly. "Pressure drop where exactly, Einstein?" Raymond answered without hesitation. "In the fuel delivery line near the exhaust manifold. The inner rubber degraded from heat cycles over decades." The room suddenly quieted again. Several mechanics exchanged uncertain glances despite themselves. Raymond's explanation sounded unusually specific for a 13-year-old child holding a broom. Preston recovered quickly. "Enough." His voice turned sharp. "Beatrice, remove your son immediately before security handles this situation." Before she could respond, Theodore Harrington raised one hand calmly. "Let the boy speak." Preston blinked with disbelief. "Ted, this is absurd." The billionaire walked slowly back toward Raymond while studying him carefully. "What's your name, son?" "Raymond Nelson, sir." "And you truly believe you understand this engine better than certified Ferrari specialists?" Raymond met his gaze steadily despite trembling nerves. "No, sir," he answered honestly. "I think I listened better." That answer changed something inside Theodore Harrington instantly. Across the room, Preston Whitmore suddenly looked nervous for the first time. News traveled quickly through San Francisco's luxury automotive circles during the following week. Wealthy collectors, journalists, and certified technicians all heard the same unbelievable story. A janitor's 13-year-old son claimed he could solve a Ferrari problem worth millions. Preston Whitmore fueled the rumors intentionally. He contacted automotive bloggers and industry reporters personally from his downtown office. Public humiliation would destroy Raymond's confidence permanently while protecting Titan Automotive's reputation. Preston wanted witnesses when the boy failed publicly. Meanwhile, Raymond spent evenings inside Giuseppe Martinelli's old Oakland garage, preparing quietly. Rainwater leaked through cracks in the ceiling, while jazz records played softly near shelves of aging Ferrari parts. Giuseppe listened silently while Raymond explained the Ferrari's symptoms from memory. "The hesitation appears only after extended engine heat," Raymond concluded carefully. "Digital systems average the pressure readings too slowly." The old mechanic nodded with growing pride. "And why does the pressure recover afterward?" "Because cooling contracts the damaged inner rubber again." Giuseppe smiled faintly beneath his grey moustache. Good. You understand behavior, not just machinery. Raymond looked uncertain despite his confidence earlier that week. What if they laugh again? Giuseppe placed a weathered hand against the teenager's shoulder. People laugh whenever truth arrives wearing poor clothes, he answered softly. Never confuse arrogance with intelligence. Across Oakland, Beatrice Nelson barely slept during those 7 days. Fear followed her everywhere like a shadow. She feared losing her cleaning jobs. She feared powerful men destroying Raymond's future before adulthood even began. Yet she also remembered fixing their broken Honda years earlier. Nobody taught Raymond engines officially. Nobody handed him opportunities generously. He learned through library books, online tutorials, and endless nights beside Giuseppe's workbench. The gift belonged entirely to him. 7 days later, Titan Automotive transformed its main service bay into something resembling a courtroom. Bright industrial lights illuminated the Ferrari beneath enormous company banners. Folding chairs formed organized rows facing the vehicle. A digital countdown clock hung prominently against the wall. 90 minutes. That was the time limit Preston demanded publicly. Automotive journalists filled the front row, carrying cameras and expensive notebooks. Ferrari North America sent regional representative Victoria Ashford from Los Angeles to oversee the evaluation personally. The Automotive Certification Board dispatched Chairman Martin Caldwell reluctantly from Sacramento. Everyone expected entertainment. Nobody expected history. Raymond entered the garage wearing neatly pressed church clothes borrowed from a neighbor's son. His white shirt looked painfully simple beside tailored business suits and luxury watches. Whispers spread immediately. That's the kid? He looks 12. This should end quickly. Beatrice sat silently near the back row, gripping her purse tightly enough to hurt her fingers. Then the service doors opened once more. Giuseppe Martinelli P. entered slowly using a wooden cane. And suddenly, every certified Ferrari technician inside the building stopped whispering. Giuseppe Martinelli moved slowly through the crowded service bay while conversations died around him. Older mechanics recognized him immediately from magazines, factory archives, and racing documentaries. Younger technicians sensed importance from everyone else's reactions. Victoria Ashford stood abruptly from her chair. "Mr. Martinelli," she said with visible surprise, "I thought you retired completely." Giuseppe smiled faintly. Old mechanics retire physically, never mentally. He stopped beside Raymond and rested one hand against the teenager's shoulder proudly. The simple gesture changed the atmosphere inside Titan Automotive instantly. "This boy trained under me for 5 years," Giuseppe announced calmly. "Longer hours than most certified apprentices survive." Derek Sullivan frowned openly. "You trained him personally?" Giuseppe looked directly toward the lead technician. "I trained many mechanics throughout my life. Raymond listens better than almost all of them." Preston Whitmore forced an uncomfortable laugh. "With respect, Giuseppe, natural curiosity differs from professional expertise." The old Italian mechanic's expression hardened slightly. "Professional expertise means solving problems," he replied evenly. "Not billing millions while failing repeatedly." Several journalists immediately began writing faster. Preston's jaw tightened visibly. Martin Caldwell from the Automotive Certification Board finally cleared his throat impatiently. "Can we proceed formally now?" The digital clock activated overhead. 90 on tag. Raymond approached the Ferrari slowly while every camera followed his movements carefully. Unlike the certified technicians earlier, he ignored laptops, scanners, and diagnostic tablets entirely. Instead, he closed his eyes beside the running engine. Whispers spread again. "What is he doing?" "Praying, maybe." "This looks ridiculous." Raymond blocked the noise mentally while focusing completely on the engine rhythm. Giuseppe taught him years earlier that mechanical systems behaved almost like living creatures. Each vibration revealed hidden information if someone listened carefully enough. 10 seconds passed, 20 seconds, 30. Then Raymond opened his eyes suddenly. "There," he said quietly. Nobody else reacted. Derek crossed his arms impatiently. "There what?" "The pressure flutter during sustained idle." Raymond pointed toward the fuel system, small enough for digital averaging software to ignore. Victoria Ashford leaned forward slightly with growing interest. Raymond turned calmly toward the equipment shelves lining the service wall. "I need an analog fuel pressure gauge from the 1960s, needle display only." Derek laughed immediately. "We have $50,000 modern diagnostic systems available." Raymond met his eyes calmly. "And they failed for 18 months. Silence returned once more. Preston gestured angrily toward an assistant technician. "Find the antique gauge," he ordered sarcastically. "Let the child play detective." 15 uncomfortable minutes later, a dusty analog pressure gauge appeared from storage. Raymond connected it carefully beneath the Ferrari's hood. "Start the engine again," he requested quietly. The legendary V12 roared back alive beneath glaring white lights. And for the first time all morning, Victoria Ashford stopped doubting him completely. The analog gauge needle held perfectly steady, while the Ferrari engine idled beneath bright service lights. Most observers looked bored again after several uneventful minutes passed slowly. Preston Whitmore checked his watch dramatically for journalists nearby. Raymond never looked away from the gauge. "Patience matters," Giuseppe whispered quietly from the back row. 20 mechanics surrounded the Ferrari, watching silently while the engine continued humming beautifully. Theodore Harrington stood near the passenger door with nervous hands buried inside his overcoat pockets. 10 minutes passed. Nothing changed. Derek Sullivan smirked confidently toward several reporters. "Engines don't care about feelings or magic tricks," he muttered loudly. "Physics always exposes amateurs eventually." Raymond ignored him completely. At exactly 17 minutes, the analog needle twitched downward almost invisibly, then recovered instantly. "There," Raymond said sharply. Victoria Ashford leaned forward immediately. "I saw movement." Martin Caldwell narrowed his eyes toward the gauge uncertainly. "Barely," Raymond nodded calmly. .4 psi pressure loss lasting less than 2 seconds. Derek shrugged dismissively. "Normal fluctuation. Every vintage system experiences small inconsistencies under prolonged idle conditions." "In fuel-injected engines, yes," Raymond answered immediately. "Computers compensate automatically during operation." He pointed toward the Ferrari engine carefully. "But this system predates modern electronic correction. Small pressure changes create temporary lean conditions during combustion cycles." Several journalists stopped writing and simply listened now. Raymond continued confidently, despite every adult watching him intensely. "The hesitation appears randomly because temperature changes alter internal rubber expansion differently each time." Victoria Ashford studied him carefully. "Explain further." Raymond crouched beside the Ferrari and traced part of the fuel line routing beneath the engine compartment. "This section sits too close to sustained exhaust heat," he explained. "Externally, the line appears perfect. Internally, the rubber degraded decades ago." Derek frowned slightly despite himself. "The damaged interior narrows during extreme heat exposure," Raymond continued. "Fuel pressure drops briefly before recovering once temperature shifts again." Martin Caldwell crossed his arms thoughtfully. "If your theory proves correct, why did advanced diagnostics never detect the fluctuation?" Raymond looked directly toward the enormous digital scanning equipment beside the wall. "Because computers average data," he answered quietly. "Machines smooth tiny irregularities automatically." Then he tapped the analog gauge gently. "But needles tell the truth immediately." Silence settled heavily throughout the service bay. Even Derek Sullivan no longer looked amused. Raymond slid carefully beneath the Ferrari using a rolling creeper board. His small frame disappeared easily underneath the vehicle while mechanics watched closely overhead. After several tense moments, his voice echoed upward. "I need a flashlight and replacement hose." Preston Whitmore blinked with visible discomfort, because deep down he suddenly realized the boy might actually be right. Raymond rolled out slowly from beneath the Ferrari with grease covering his sleeves and collar. The spotless white church shirt now carried dark stains across the fabric, yet his expression remained calm and intensely focused. He held up a short section of original fuel line carefully. "Look inside," he said quietly. Derek Sullivan accepted the hose reluctantly while several technicians gathered around him. Under direct flashlight beams, the outer rubber still appeared nearly flawless despite its age. Then Derek looked deeper into the interior lining. His face changed instantly. Tiny cracks spidered invisibly through the inner material like dried riverbeds. Heat damage had warped the passageway unevenly after decades beside the exhaust manifold. "My God," Derek whispered softly. Victoria Ashford stepped forward and examined the hose personally. "The interior diameter narrows under thermal expansion," she concluded slowly. Raymond nodded once. "Enough to disrupt fuel delivery temporarily during prolonged operation," he explained. "Not enough for digital systems averaging data across broader cycles." Martin Caldwell adjusted his glasses while studying the damaged material closely. "This explains why standard inspections failed repeatedly." Giuseppe smiled proudly from the back row. Preston Whitmore looked pale beneath the harsh service lights. Raymond requested a modern replacement line and several basic tools immediately afterward. Nobody argued anymore. Mechanics moved quickly now, almost eager to assist the teenager they mocked earlier. The atmosphere inside Titan Automotive had shifted completely. Raymond installed the replacement line carefully while reporters photographed every movement intensely. Theodore Harrington watched silently beside the Ferrari with growing disbelief and fragile hope fighting behind his tired eyes. 30 minutes later, the installation finished. "Start the engine again," Raymond said quietly. The Ferrari roared alive beneath the bright lights. Everyone stared directly at the analog gauge. 5 minutes passed. 10, 15, 20. The needle never moved. At 27 minutes, the engine remained perfectly smooth, without hesitation or vibration changes. The earlier stumble had completely disappeared. Nobody spoke. Then Theodore Harrington suddenly laughed. Not politely, not carefully. Real laughter burst from him unexpectedly after 18 painful months of frustration. Tears filled his eyes while the Ferrari engine purred steadily behind Raymond. "It's gone," Theodore whispered emotionally. The hesitation finally disappeared. Victoria Ashford stood slowly before addressing the room formally. "In 23 years, representing Ferrari North America," she announced clearly, "I have never witnessed diagnostic work this extraordinary." Cameras flashed rapidly. Preston Whitmore stared toward the ground while journalists turned eagerly in his direction. Every expensive repair invoice suddenly looked suspicious under public scrutiny. Raymond cleaned grease from his hands quietly, using an old shop towel. "The car wasn't broken," he explained softly. "It was simply trying to survive old age." Theodore Harrington approached him slowly. Then the billionaire extended his hand toward the 13-year-old boy like an equal. And every person inside Titan Automotive noticed it immediately. Theodore Harrington's handshake lasted longer than anyone expected inside the silent garage. The billionaire's eyes carried gratitude deeper than simple professional respect. Raymond noticed his hands still trembled slightly from emotion. "You brought my family back to me," Theodore said quietly. Raymond shook his head gently. "They never left you, sir. The Ferrari only needed somebody willing to listen carefully." Several journalists lowered their cameras briefly after hearing the answer. Even hardened reporters recognized honesty when it appeared unexpectedly. Preston Whitmore suddenly stepped forward, attempting to regain authority over the collapsing situation. "One successful observation does not replace certified training," he argued sharply. "Professional automotive restoration requires legal standards and institutional accountability." Victoria Ashford turned toward him immediately. "And 18 months of failure represents accountability?" she asked coldly. The room fell silent again. Martin Caldwell adjusted his tie awkwardly before speaking carefully. "Mr. Whitmore, the board will require complete service documentation for independent review." Preston's expression tightened visibly. "Of course," Theodore Harrington interrupted before he continued further. "I paid over $2 million for unnecessary repairs," the billionaire stated calmly. "Every failed diagnosis happened under your supervision." No response came. Meanwhile, Raymond stood quietly beside the Ferrari, while mechanics stared toward him differently now. Earlier, they saw a janitor's son holding a broom. Now they saw expertise impossible to explain comfortably. Derek Sullivan finally approached awkwardly with folded arms. "You really learned all this from Giuseppe's garage?" he asked. Raymond nodded once. And public library books. Derek looked embarrassed for perhaps the first time in years. I mocked you earlier. You weren't listening yet, Raymond answered simply. That response struck Derek harder than anger ever could. Outside, the San Francisco rain finally slowed into soft mist drifting through city streets. Grey afternoon light filtered through the enormous service windows while the Ferrari engine continued running perfectly. Theodore suddenly looked toward Raymond thoughtfully. "Would you ride with me?" he asked quietly. Preston reacted immediately. "Absolutely not. Insurance restrictions alone make that impossible." The billionaire ignored him completely. "I need someone beside me who understands this car," Theodore continued. "Somebody who understands what it means." Raymond glanced nervously toward his mother. Beatrice hesitated several seconds before nodding slowly. Fear still lived behind her eyes, but pride finally stood beside it. Theodore opened the Ferrari passenger door personally. Every mechanic inside the building watched in disbelief. A billionaire collector was inviting a 13-year-old black teenager from Oakland into one of America's rarest automobiles. Not as entertainment, as someone worthy. Raymond carefully entered the Ferrari while reporters rushed outside toward the parking area. Camera flashes reflected against wet pavement beneath the fading California sky. Then Theodore Harrington started the engine once more, and together they drove into San Francisco traffic while Titan Automotive stood speechless behind them. San Francisco traffic crawled slowly beneath fading gray skies while the Ferrari moved smoothly through downtown streets. Theodore Harrington drove carefully with both hands, gripping the leather steering wheel. Raymond listened quietly beside him while the V12 engine purred flawlessly. For the first time in 18 months, Theodore felt peace instead of fear behind the wheel. They climbed toward Pacific Heights, where previous engine failures always occurred. Expensive homes overlooked the fog-covered bay, while rainwater reflected city lights across steep roads. "This hill terrified me recently," Theodore admitted softly. The engine stalled twice near the cathedral. Raymond watched the temperature gauge calmly. The damaged line probably expanded completely during uphill heat stress. The Ferrari climbed without hesitation, no stumble, no vibration, no failure. Theodore exhaled deeply like a drowning man finally reaching air. "My father drove these roads with me during the 70s, he said quietly, back when San Francisco still felt rough around the edges. Raymond listened respectfully while city lights shimmered across the windshield. "He worked construction before building his first aerospace company," Theodore continued. "People think wealthy families always start wealthy." He smiled faintly. "My father repaired elevators during daytime and studied engineering at night." Raymond looked toward him with genuine curiosity. "That sounds difficult." "It was America before shortcuts," Theodore answered. "People built lives slowly." The Ferrari reached the exact intersection where it previously stalled repeatedly. Theodore's fingers tightened unconsciously against the wheel. The engine remained perfect. Suddenly, emotion overwhelmed him completely. "My son Michael loved this sound," Theodore whispered painfully. "He said the engine sounded alive." The billionaire's eyes filled with tears again, while the city blurred softly beyond the glass. "He died 15 years ago, returning home from graduate school," Theodore admitted quietly. "Drunk driver near Sacramento." Raymond lowered his eyes respectfully. "My father died too," he said softly after several moments. "Construction accident when I was 3. Theodore glanced toward him carefully. "Do you remember him much?" "Mostly my mother missing him." Silence settled warmly instead of awkwardly. Two people from entirely different worlds suddenly understood each other through grief more than status ever could. The Ferrari descended toward the waterfront afterward while evening fog rolled across the bay. Tourists crowded sidewalks near Fisherman's Wharf beneath glowing restaurant signs. Then Theodore noticed something unexpected. People stared openly toward Raymond sitting inside the Ferrari. Some looked confused. Some looked annoyed. Some looked impressed. Raymond noticed it too. "You're wondering why they're staring," Theodore said quietly. Raymond gave a small shrug. "I'm used to it." The billionaire looked ahead thoughtfully while tightening his grip slightly. "That," he said carefully, "is exactly why this country still breaks my heart sometimes. The Ferrari returned to Titan Automotive just after sunset beneath glowing San Francisco streetlights. Reporters crowded near the entrance, holding cameras high while mechanics waited anxiously inside the service bay. Theodore Harrington stepped out first, wearing an expression nobody had seen from him recently: hope. "The engine never failed once," he announced immediately. "Not during hills, traffic, or extended idle." Camera flashes exploded across the garage. Journalists surrounded Raymond next, while shouting overlapping questions excitedly. "How did you discover the problem? Did someone train you professionally? What happens next for you?" Raymond looked overwhelmed briefly before answering calmly. "I just listened carefully," he explained simply. "Machines usually explain themselves eventually." That quote reached social media before midnight. Inside the garage, Victoria Ashford reviewed Titan Automotive's repair records alongside Martin Caldwell carefully. Thick folders covered the conference table near Preston Whitmore's office. The numbers looked worse every hour. Repeated billing for unnecessary diagnostics, duplicate labor charges, parts replacements unsupported by documented failures. Victoria closed one folder sharply. "Either your technicians lack basic competence," she said coldly toward Preston, "or somebody exploited Theodore Harrington deliberately." Preston's confident image finally cracked completely. "These accusations are irresponsible," he argued weakly. "Vintage restorations involve uncertainty and evolving assessments." Martin Caldwell adjusted his glasses while studying another invoice. "You charged $47,000 for injector recalibration," he noted carefully, but the fuel delivery line remained untouched. No answer came. Meanwhile, Derek Sullivan stood alone near the Ferrari, staring quietly at the replacement hose Raymond installed earlier. Years of pride suddenly felt fragile beneath harsh fluorescent lights. He remembered mocking Raymond publicly only hours earlier. Now journalists called the teenager a prodigy. Across the garage, Beatrice Nelson watched her son speaking with reporters while disbelief overwhelmed her completely. She spent years teaching Raymond survival through silence because America punished poor families harshly. Tonight, silence almost stole his future instead. Theodore approached her slowly, carrying 2 cups of coffee from the employee lounge. "You raised an extraordinary young man," he said sincerely. Beatrice accepted the coffee nervously. "I spent years worrying his intelligence would make life harder." The billionaire nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes gifted people threaten insecure systems," he admitted, "especially when talent appears where society refuses expecting it." Before she could respond, shouting suddenly erupted near Preston's office. A furious customer stormed through the garage, carrying paperwork aggressively. "I heard about the Ferrari kid online," the man yelled loudly. "You charged me 80 grand last year for useless repairs too." Several mechanics exchanged nervous glances instantly. Then another customer entered, and another. Preston Whitmore suddenly realized Raymond Nelson had repaired far more than one Ferrari. He accidentally exposed an entire empire built upon deception. By sunrise the following morning, Raymond Nelson's name spread across American automotive news websites and social media platforms. Clips from Titan Automotive accumulated millions of views overnight. Reporters called him the teenager who heard what computers missed. Oakland neighbors gathered outside Beatrice Nelson's apartment building before breakfast, carrying phones and newspapers excitedly. Some congratulated her proudly, while others simply stared with disbelief. Beatrice still struggled processing everything herself. 1 week earlier, she worried about overdue utility bills and grocery money. Now, national reporters requested interviews with her 13-year-old son. Inside their small apartment, Raymond sat quietly at the kitchen table, eating cereal while reading an old engine manual. Fame changed nothing about his habits. "You should probably sleep more," Beatrice told him gently. Raymond looked up with a small smile. "Engines don't care about sleep schedules." She laughed, despite her exhaustion. Across San Francisco, Titan Automotive faced complete chaos. Angry clients flooded phone lines, demanding explanations about previous repair invoices and failed diagnostics. Several wealthy collectors threatened lawsuits publicly. Preston Whitmore locked himself inside his office, while attorneys reviewed financial records desperately. Every television inside the waiting lounge replayed Raymond's diagnosis repeatedly. The headlines grew worse hourly. Teenager solves multi-million-dollar Ferrari mystery. Luxury garage exposed after child finds $40 problem. Meanwhile, Ferrari North America launched a formal audit immediately. Victoria Ashford personally supervised the investigation with ruthless efficiency. She respected competence deeply and dishonesty even less. At noon, Theodore Harrington arrived unexpectedly at the Nelson apartment complex, driving a black Cadillac sedan. Wealthy executives rarely visited East Oakland personally. Children playing basketball stopped immediately. The billionaire climbed the apartment stairs, carrying a leather folder beneath one arm. Beatrice answered the door nervously before inviting him inside. Their apartment looked painfully modest beside Theodore's world. Old furniture, faded curtains, crowded bookshelves filled with repair manuals and borrowed library texts. Theodore noticed everything silently. Then he noticed Raymond's notebooks stacked beside the kitchen table. Hundreds of hand-drawn engine diagrams filled the pages carefully. Fuel systems, transmission layouts, carburetor breakdowns, years of obsessive study hidden inside cheap composition books. "You drew all these yourself?" Theodore asked quietly. Raymond nodded. "Books help me remember better when I redraw everything manually." The billionaire slowly closed one notebook while emotion crossed his face again. "My son learned similarly," he admitted softly. "He filled notebooks studying aircraft designs when he was young." Silence settled briefly, then Theodore placed the leather folder carefully onto the kitchen table. Inside rested scholarship documents, educational trust agreements, and private academy applications already prepared professionally. Raymond stared at the paperwork speechlessly. But Theodore Harrington had one final offer nobody expected, and accepting it would change Raymond's life forever. Theodore Harrington opened the leather folder slowly, while Raymond and Beatrice watched silently across the kitchen table. Morning sunlight filtered weakly through faded apartment curtains overlooking crowded Oakland streets. "These documents guarantee your education completely," Theodore explained calmly. "Private schools, university tuition, housing, transportation, everything." Beatrice covered her mouth emotionally. Raymond stared toward the paperwork carefully before speaking. "Why would you do this for me?" The billionaire leaned back quietly while studying the teenager across from him. "Because somebody once did something similar for my father," he answered honestly. "One opportunity changed our family permanently." He paused briefly. "And because America wastes too many gifted people simply because they start poor." Raymond lowered his eyes thoughtfully. Theodore continued carefully afterward. "I also want you working inside my restoration garage, weekends and summers," he added. "Paid professionally, not charity." Beatrice looked nervous immediately. "Mr. Harrington, Raymond still needs a normal childhood too." The billionaire nodded respectfully. "I understand completely." Then he smiled slightly toward Raymond. "But extraordinary minds rarely live ordinary lives." Before anyone answered, loud knocking suddenly echoed through the apartment doorway. 3 television reporters waited outside holding microphones and cameras impatiently. News helicopters already circled neighborhoods nearby, searching for footage. Beatrice looked overwhelmed instantly. "This is happening too fast," she whispered. Theodore stood carefully and moved toward the doorway himself. Years of corporate negotiations taught him how media operated under pressure. "Give the family privacy today," he instructed reporters firmly. "Raymond Nelson remains a minor." One journalist shouted another question before leaving. "Is it true Ferrari North America offered him apprenticeships already?" Theodore closed the door without answering. Meanwhile, across San Francisco, Preston Whitmore's situation deteriorated rapidly. Ferrari North America suspended Titan Automotive's certification pending investigation results. Wealthy collectors immediately cancelled service contracts worth millions. Inside the nearly empty garage, Derek Sullivan sat alone beside the repaired Ferrari, quietly replaying every moment from yesterday. Shame followed him harder than public embarrassment. He remembered Raymond's calm voice. "You weren't listening yet." That sentence haunted him continuously. Later that afternoon, Derek drove across the Bay Bridge toward Oakland carrying a paper bag filled with coffee and pastries. GPS directions eventually guided him toward Giuseppe Martinelli's modest garage. Inside, Raymond worked beside the old mechanic, rebuilding a damaged carburetor carefully. Neither looked surprised seeing Derek arrive. "I owe both of you an apology," Derek admitted immediately. Giuseppe continued working silently. Derek looked directly toward Raymond afterward. "I became lazy years ago," he confessed quietly. "Computers replaced instincts. Prestige replaced curiosity." Raymond wiped grease from his hands before answering softly, "You can relearn curiosity." Derek swallowed hard. "Would you teach me?" The teenager exchanged a glance with Giuseppe first, then Raymond smiled slightly. "Saturday mornings start early here," he replied. And for the first time in years, Derek Sullivan felt hopeful instead of important. Saturday mornings at Giuseppe Martinelli's garage began before sunrise, regardless of weather or exhaustion. Cold Oakland fog drifted through cracked windows while jazz records played softly beside crowded tool shelves. Raymond arrived first, carrying donuts and repair manuals beneath one arm. Derek Sullivan appeared minutes later, wearing plain work clothes instead of Titan automotive uniforms. Pride no longer dressed him each morning. Giuseppe pointed toward an old Chevrolet engine block immediately. "Take it apart completely," the old mechanic ordered. Derek frowned slightly. "Without power tools?" "Your hands forgot patience," Giuseppe answered calmly. "We start there." Hours passed slowly inside the garage. Raymond rebuilt carburetors while Derek struggled removing rusted bolts manually. Sweat covered the older mechanic's forehead despite the cold air. "You rely too heavily on speed," Raymond explained quietly while adjusting fuel valves nearby. "Machines reveal details slowly sometimes." Derek laughed bitterly. Funny hearing life advice from someone 13 years old. Giuseppe glanced toward him sharply. "Wisdom and birthdays rarely travel together," the old man muttered. Meanwhile, Theodore Harrington's legal team uncovered devastating information during their investigation into Titan Automotive. Financial auditors identified inflated invoices, unnecessary labor charges, and fraudulent diagnostic reports spanning nearly 6 years. Several wealthy collectors joined together preparing civil lawsuits publicly. Preston Whitmore stopped answering calls entirely. His wife Clara moved into a hotel downtown after reporters began camping outside their home. Society friends disappeared quickly once scandal replaced status. Inside expensive restaurants and country clubs across California, people whispered about him openly now. Not with admiration, with embarrassment. Across Oakland, Raymond's life changed equally fast but differently. Private schools suddenly offered scholarships. Technology companies requested appearances. National interview programs invited him repeatedly. Raymond declined almost everything. Instead, he spent evenings studying engineering textbooks Theodore purchased for him, advanced thermodynamics, material science, mechanical design principles. Beatrice watched her son carefully during those weeks. "You're carrying too much pressure," she warned gently one night. Raymond looked up from his notebooks quietly. "People finally see me now." "That scares me," she admitted honestly. He understood immediately. Visibility brought opportunities. It also brought expectations capable of crushing adults. Several days later, Ferrari North America hosted a private ceremony in Los Angeles honoring Raymond formally. Wealthy executives, engineers, and racing legends filled the ballroom beneath enormous crystal chandeliers. Raymond felt uncomfortable wearing his borrowed suit among people worth billions. Then Victoria Ashford introduced him publicly. This young man reminded an entire industry that expertise means observation, not ego, she announced proudly. Applause thundered across the ballroom. Yet Raymond noticed one empty seat near the stage. Preston Whitmore's reserved place remained vacant beneath harsh spotlight beams. And suddenly, Raymond realized something important. Winning publicly often meant somebody powerful lost everything privately. The empty chair reserved for Preston Whitmore lingered inside Raymond's thoughts throughout the Los Angeles ceremony. Wealthy executives toasted innovation beneath crystal chandeliers, while violin music drifted softly across the ballroom. Yet Raymond kept thinking about consequences. Success always created shadows somewhere. After the ceremony concluded, Theodore Harrington invited Raymond onto a private balcony overlooking downtown Los Angeles. Helicopter lights blinked above crowded freeways, stretching endlessly beneath the California night. "You handled tonight gracefully," Theodore observed quietly. Raymond loosened his borrowed tie slightly. "Everyone keeps acting like I changed the world." The billionaire smiled faintly. "Sometimes exposing truth changes worlds accidentally." Far away in San Francisco, Preston Whitmore sat alone inside his dark office, surrounded by cardboard storage boxes. Titan Automotive's board officially terminated his employment that afternoon. His access cards stopped functioning before sunset. News outlets replayed Raymond's diagnosis continuously across television screens mounted inside empty waiting rooms. Former clients filed lawsuits publicly, while Ferrari North America permanently revoked Titan Automotive's certification. Preston poured expensive whiskey into a crystal glass using trembling hands. For years, he believed prestige protected him from consequences forever. Now silence filled the same office where arrogance once ruled comfortably. A framed Harvard diploma hung crookedly against the wall beside photographs from charity galas and luxury racing events. None of those achievements mattered anymore. One sentence destroyed everything. And nobody was listening. Meanwhile, Raymond returned home to Oakland late that night, carrying new scholarship offers inside a leather briefcase. Reporters still waited outside the apartment complex despite the late hour. Inside their small kitchen, Beatrice prepared grilled cheese sandwiches quietly, while local news discussed Raymond's future endlessly. "You know what bothers me most," she admitted softly. Raymond looked up from the television. "Those men only respected you after rich people approved first." The statement settled heavily between them, because both understood it was true. Theodore Harrington believed Raymond immediately. Ferrari executives validated him publicly. Only afterward did others finally listen sincerely. Raymond stared thoughtfully toward his notebooks stacked beside the kitchen counter. "Giuseppe listened before anybody important did," he answered quietly. Beatrice smiled faintly. "That old man sees souls better than most pastors." The following weekend, Raymond visited Theodore Harrington's private restoration warehouse outside Sacramento for the first time. Vintage Jaguars, Aston Martins, Hanan, Duran Marsanins, and classic Corvettes filled the enormous climate-controlled facility. But one vehicle near the back wall captured Raymond's attention immediately. A partially covered midnight blue Shelby Cobra sat untouched beneath dusty tarps. Theodore noticed his reaction instantly. "That car belonged to my son," he explained softly. Raymond approached carefully while studying the neglected vehicle. "When did it last run?" he asked. The billionaire looked away toward the warehouse windows. 15 years ago, he admitted quietly. Then Theodore handed Raymond a small ring of keys. And suddenly the teenager understood this repair would involve far more than engines again. Dust covered the midnight blue Shelby Cobra like years of grief frozen physically in place. Raymond walked slowly around the vehicle while afternoon sunlight filtered through warehouse windows near Sacramento. Theodore Harrington remained several steps behind him silently. "My son bought this car during graduate school," the billionaire explained quietly. He planned restoring it himself after finishing engineering classes. Raymond touched the dusty hood carefully. The metal still felt strangely alive beneath his fingertips. "What happened after the accident?" he asked softly. Theodore swallowed hard before answering. "I parked it here afterward and locked the warehouse. 15 years, no repairs, no visitors, no movement, just silence." Raymond looked toward the old keyring resting inside his palm. He suddenly understood Theodore trusted him with something deeply personal again. "This isn't really about fixing the car," Raymond observed gently. The billionaire stared toward the warehouse floor. "No," he admitted quietly. "I think it's about surviving memory." Silence settled warmly between them afterward. Then Raymond opened the driver's side door slowly. Inside, faded racing gloves still rested near the dashboard, exactly where Michael Harrington left them years earlier. Old cassette tapes remained stacked inside the center console beside engineering textbooks. Nothing moved. Time simply stopped there. Raymond noticed Theodore's hands shaking again. "Would you like me to restore it completely?" the teenager asked carefully. The billionaire hesitated several seconds, then he shook his head slowly. "No, Theodore answered. "I want us restoring it together." That answer surprised Raymond more than anything else. Across California, meanwhile, Preston Whitmore faced formal fraud investigations from state regulators and federal tax authorities. Former employees cooperated willingly after years of resentment beneath his leadership. Titan Automotive closed temporarily pending legal review. Inside Oakland's Martinelli garage, Derek Sullivan continued arriving every Saturday morning faithfully. Pride disappeared gradually while curiosity returned slowly. One rainy evening, Derek stayed late, helping Raymond organize replacement parts. "Can I ask something honestly?" he said awkwardly. Raymond looked up from the workbench. "Sure." Derek leaned against an engine stand quietly. "When everyone laughed at you inside Titan Automotive, were you scared?" Raymond thought carefully before answering. "Yes," he admitted finally, "but being ignored your whole life becomes exhausting eventually." Derek lowered his eyes. The teenager continued softly afterward. "My mother taught me survival. Giuseppe taught me confidence. I needed both." Rain tapped gently against the garage roof overhead. Then Giuseppe spoke from his chair near the doorway. "America son always tests gifted people differently depending where they begin," he muttered thoughtfully. Nobody argued, because everyone inside that small Oakland garage already understood exactly what he meant. Winter rain soaked Oakland continuously during the following weeks, while Raymond balanced schoolwork, interviews, and restoration projects carefully. Life moved faster now, yet Giuseppe's garage remained unchanged. Old jazz records still played softly. Coffee still brewed too strong. Engines still revealed truths patiently. The Shelby Cobra restoration became Raymond and Theodore Harrington's shared ritual every Sunday afternoon. Wealth and poverty disappeared strangely inside the warehouse once grease covered everyone's hands equally. Theodore rebuilt suspension components while Raymond restored the fuel system carefully. Neither rushed conversations anymore. Trust developed slowly through quiet work instead. One afternoon, Theodore uncovered an old photograph hidden inside the glove compartment. Michael Harrington stood smiling beside the unfinished Shelby at 23 years old. Wind lifted his dark hair while engine parts surrounded him inside this same warehouse. Theodore stared silently at the photograph for several moments. "He would have liked you," he admitted quietly. Raymond wiped his hands using a shop towel awkwardly. "I think I would have liked him too." Meanwhile, across California, public fascination surrounding Raymond intensified dramatically. Television producers offered reality shows centered around young automotive geniuses. Corporations proposed sponsorships and licensing deals aggressively. Raymond rejected every offer. Giuseppe approved silently. "Attention makes fools rich quickly," the old mechanic warned one evening. "But wisdom survives longer than fame." Still, pressure mounted steadily. At school, Raymond overheard students whispering constantly behind his back. Some admired him openly. Others resented the sudden attention and scholarship opportunities. One afternoon, a teacher stopped him after physics class. "You understand concepts beyond this curriculum already," she admitted carefully. "Have you considered advanced university placement testing?" Raymond hesitated. Adults suddenly expected greatness from him everywhere. That expectation felt heavier than poverty sometimes. Later that week, Theodore invited Raymond and Beatrice to a charity gala in San Francisco, supporting engineering education for disadvantaged youth. Crystal chandeliers illuminated wealthy donors wearing designer clothing beneath enormous ballroom ceilings. Beatrice felt deeply uncomfortable immediately. People stared subtly again. Not cruelly this time, curiously. During dinner, an older investor leaned toward Theodore carelessly. "So this is the famous garage prodigy," the man joked lightly. "Quite a lucky break for the kid." Raymond noticed Theodore's expression harden instantly. "Luck didn't diagnose my Ferrari," the billionaire answered coldly. "Talent did." The table fell quiet afterward. Beatrice looked toward Theodore with silent gratitude. For years she fought alone against assumptions attached to race, poverty, and neighborhoods. Watching someone powerful challenge those assumptions publicly felt unfamiliar. Yet later that evening, Raymond overheard another donor whispering nearby. "He's impressive now," the woman murmured softly. "But children from difficult backgrounds usually struggle eventually." Raymond said nothing outwardly. "Yeah, means," but the words followed him home like cold rain, and for the first time since Titan Automotive, doubt quietly returned again. The donor's whisper stayed inside Raymond's mind long after the charity gala ended. San Francisco lights blurred outside Theodore Harrington's car while rain streaked softly across the windows. Children from difficult backgrounds usually struggle eventually. The sentence felt painfully familiar. People praised him publicly now, yet many still expected failure privately. Raymond finally understood success did not erase prejudice completely, it only disguised it better. Back in Oakland, Giuseppe noticed Raymond unusually quiet during Saturday garage lessons. "You're listening too much to strangers," the old mechanic observed while adjusting an old Maserati carburetor. Raymond tightened a bolt carefully without looking up. What if they're right eventually? Giuseppe laughed sharply. "People predicted Enzo Ferrari would fail too," he answered dismissively. "America worships confidence but fears unusual talent." Derek Sullivan glanced toward Raymond thoughtfully from another workbench. "You know what scares insecure people most?" Derek asked quietly. "Being proven wrong by someone they underestimated." Raymond considered that silently. Meanwhile, Theodore Harrington faced his own growing pressure. Corporate board members worried publicly about his increasing involvement with Raymond. Financial advisors recommended distancing himself from media controversy before investors reacted negatively. One executive confronted Theodore directly during a board meeting in Palo Alto. "With respect, your emotional attachment compromises professional judgment," the man argued carefully. "This situation attracts unnecessary attention." Theodore stared across the conference table coldly. "My son died because a drunk driver made reckless choices," he replied quietly. "Supporting gifted young people hardly qualifies as recklessness." Nobody challenged him afterward. Several weeks later, Raymond received invitation letters from prestigious engineering academies across America. Massachusetts, Illinois, California. Each envelope represented opportunity beyond anything Beatrice imagined possible. Yet choosing one path meant leaving Oakland eventually. Leaving Giuseppe, leaving familiarity. One rainy evening, Raymond walked alone through downtown Oakland, carrying groceries for his mother. Streetlights reflected against wet sidewalks, while distant sirens echoed through nearby neighborhoods. Bah! A police cruiser slowed beside him unexpectedly. Two officers studied him carefully through the passenger window. "Where are you heading tonight?" one officer asked. Raymond answered calmly, while holding grocery bags visibly. The interaction lasted barely 2 minutes. Yet afterward, Raymond stood motionless beneath the rain, feeling exhausted suddenly. Famous interviews and scholarship offers changed nothing during moments like that. He still looked suspicious first. Later that night, Theodore called unexpectedly. "The Shelby Cobra is finally ready for ignition testing," the billionaire announced excitedly. Raymond smiled genuinely for the first time all day. The following Sunday, they stood together inside the Sacramento warehouse beside the fully restored midnight blue Cobra. Every polished surface gleamed beneath warm overhead lighting. Theodore handed Raymond the ignition keys carefully. "No," Raymond said softly, "you should start it." The billionaire hesitated before turning the key slowly. The engine roared alive instantly, and Theodore Harrington suddenly began crying harder than Raymond had ever seen before. The Shelby Cobra's engine thundered through the Sacramento warehouse with raw mechanical power and painful memory combined together. Theodore Harrington gripped the steering wheel tightly while tears rolled freely down his face. For 15 years, silence buried this car beside grief. Now the engine breathed again. Raymond stood quietly nearby, understanding some moments required witnessing instead of speaking. The polished midnight blue Cobra vibrated gently beneath warm warehouse lights, while old emotions surfaced finally. Theodore shut the engine off slowly after several minutes. "He always wanted hearing this car finished," he whispered hoarsely. Raymond approached carefully afterward. "He still does," the teenager answered softly. The billionaire looked toward him with exhausted gratitude. During the following months, Raymond's world expanded rapidly beyond Oakland garages and repair manuals. Universities arranged private tours. Engineering professors requested meetings. National magazines featured him beside photographs of the Ferrari. Yet success brought uncomfortable attention too. Online critics questioned whether journalists exaggerated his talent for inspirational headlines. Anonymous commenters claimed experienced engineers secretly guided him behind the scenes. Raymond read those comments silently one evening before closing the laptop angrily. Beatrice noticed immediately. People attack what challenges their assumptions, she reminded him gently. Raymond rubbed tired eyes. What if proving myself never actually ends? She sat beside him quietly. For people like us, she admitted honestly, sometimes it doesn't. The truth hurt because both already understood it deeply. Meanwhile, Derek Sullivan transformed gradually under Giuseppe's mentorship. He abandoned expensive shortcuts and computerized dependency entirely. For the first time in years, he enjoyed mechanical work again. One Saturday afternoon, Derek approached Raymond beside the workbench. You changed more than my career, he admitted quietly. You changed how I see people. Raymond looked surprised. Derek continued carefully. I spent years assuming credentials measured intelligence automatically. Truthfully, I stopped seeing individuals completely. Giuseppe smiled faintly from across the garage. Real education humbles people, the old mechanic muttered. That same week, Ferrari North America announced a new apprenticeship initiative, officially named the Nelson Martinelli Program. The program funded technical education opportunities for underserved teenagers interested in engineering and restoration work. Raymond stared speechlessly at the announcement banner during the press conference. His own name hung beside Giuseppe's across enormous screens. Reporters applauded. Executives smiled. Cameras flashed continuously. Yet afterward, Raymond slipped quietly outside alone onto the convention center balcony overlooking San Francisco Bay. The city shimmered beneath evening fog while distant ferry horns echoed across dark water. Theodore eventually joined him, carrying 2 cups of coffee. You should feel proud tonight, the billionaire said. Raymond accepted the coffee silently before answering. I keep thinking about kids nobody notices yet, he admitted quietly. Kids smarter than me working jobs instead of chasing opportunities. Theodore studied him thoughtfully. That concern, he replied softly, is exactly why you'll matter beyond engines someday. Far below the balcony, hundreds of people celebrated Raymond Nelson publicly. But privately, the teenager already understood his story represented something far larger than automobiles. Spring arrived slowly across Northern California while Raymond Nelson prepared for the largest decision of his young life. Acceptance letters covered the kitchen table inside the Oakland apartment. Massachusetts Institute of Technology, Stanford Engineering Academy, University of Chicago Advanced Sciences Program. Every opportunity carried prestige beyond anything Beatrice once imagined possible. Yet Raymond felt strangely uncertain. One evening, he sat alone inside Giuseppe's garage, listening to rainwater drip softly through the old roof. Engine parts surrounded him like familiar friends, while jazz music played quietly nearby. Giuseppe noticed the conflict immediately. You already know your decision, the old mechanic said without looking up. Raymond sighed heavily. Leaving feels wrong somehow. Giuseppe smiled faintly while polishing an old Ferrari intake manifold. Roots matter, he agreed softly. But roots exist, so people grow beyond them eventually. The teenager stared toward the crowded workbenches thoughtfully. This garage saved my life, he admitted. No, Giuseppe corrected gently. You saved your own life. The garage simply gave you room becoming yourself. Meanwhile, Theodore Harrington quietly finalized funding for the Martinelli Nelson School of Automotive Arts in Oakland. Renovations transformed 3 abandoned warehouses into classrooms, restoration bays, and engineering labs for underserved students. Construction crews worked daily beneath giant banners carrying Raymond's favorite phrase, "Every machine tells you what's wrong." The opening ceremony attracted national media attention weeks later. Politicians, engineers, reporters, and local families crowded outside the renovated facility beneath bright California sunshine. Raymond stood nervously backstage, wearing a simple navy suit while listening to the audience gather. You belong out there, Beatrice whispered proudly. The teenager looked toward her quietly. Do you really believe everything changed? She smiled sadly. Not everything, she answered honestly. But enough things changed because you spoke up. During the ceremony, Theodore Harrington addressed the crowd first. "Talent exists everywhere," he announced powerfully. "Opportunity does not." Applause thundered across the audience. Then Theodore introduced Raymond publicly. The teenager stepped onto the stage beneath enormous cameras and bright afternoon sunlight. Hundreds of faces watched silently. Raymond hesitated briefly before speaking. "When I walked into Titan Automotive carrying a broom," he began carefully, "most people already decided who I was." The crowd remained perfectly quiet. "But one person listened before judging me," he continued, while glancing toward Giuseppe. "Sometimes changing someone's life begins with simple respect." Several audience members wiped tears quietly. Then Raymond looked toward the young students standing near the front rows. "I know many of you feel invisible sometimes," he admitted softly. "I know what that feels like too." His voice strengthened afterward. "But invisibility ends the moment you stop believing other people define your worth." The audience inside the Martinelli Nelson School of Automotive Arts stood applauding while Raymond finished speaking beneath warm California sunlight. Cameras flashed continuously across the renovated Oakland warehouse, yet Raymond's attention remained focused on the students near the front rows. Teenagers wearing thrift store clothes, kids carrying uncertainty behind guarded expressions. Young people already underestimated by society repeatedly, he recognized himself inside many of them. After the ceremony concluded, families toured classrooms filled with engines, tools, and engineering equipment funded through Theodore Harrington's foundation. Local students touched restored vehicles carefully like sacred objects. One quiet 12-year-old boy lingered near Raymond beside an old Mustang engine. "You really taught yourself using library books?" the child asked nervously. Raymond smiled softly. "Mostly library books and mistakes." The boy hesitated before speaking again. "My teachers think I ask too many questions." Giuseppe overheard the conversation nearby and laughed warmly. "Questions built every great machine humanity ever created," the old mechanic declared proudly. The boy smiled for the first time. Across the room, Theodore Harrington watched everything silently beside Beatrice Nelson. The billionaire looked healthier now than he had inside Titan Automotive months earlier. Grief still lived within him, but purpose lived there too. "You gave him his life back," Beatrice told Theodore quietly. The billionaire shook his head gently. "No," he answered while watching Raymond teach students already gathering around him. "Your son gave all of us something back." Later that evening, the crowds disappeared gradually while sunset painted Oakland streets gold and orange. Raymond remained alone inside the garage, organizing tools after everyone left. The building smelled like oil, fresh paint, and possibility. Giuseppe approached slowly, using his wooden cane. "You did well today," he said softly. Raymond looked around the enormous workshop thoughtfully. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if I stayed quiet that day?" he asked. Giuseppe smiled sadly. "Every important moment begins with someone refusing silence," he replied. Outside, city lights awakened across Oakland while distant traffic echoed beneath the evening sky. Somewhere nearby, another gifted child probably sat unnoticed inside a crowded apartment. Another future engineer, another artist, another dreamer carrying invisible brilliance. Raymond finally understood the deeper lesson hidden beneath everything that happened. The Ferrari was never truly the story. The real story involved who society allows being heard. He switched off the garage lights carefully before walking outside beside Giuseppe into the cooling night air. And somewhere behind them, engines rested quietly inside the darkness, waiting patiently for someone humble enough to listen. Subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, and share this video.